We are very honored as a non-profit organization to be able to organize that this session today. So I also want to thank our sponsors and members. So CAPGEMINI is one of our sponsors, and Jean-Claude is here today. Thank you very much. And of course, Paul, Bank of the West, and also Salesforce.com, Work.com, who is one of our main support. You know, as a non-profit organization, it's very important to us. So I really want to thank them. Just a last detail. So we're all on mute today, and of course not the speakers, but if you want to ask any question, please do so with the written chat, and at the end of the session, Gilles will select the question carefully. So Gilles, now the floor is yours. I think I've said everything. Have a nice session, everybody, and thank you again for being here today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Laurence, and good morning, everyone. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. It's a real pleasure to have you here for episode number 6 of a series, and today we're talking, as you said, about economic relationship between France and the US on this new world that is opening to us after COVID. Can technology play a role in the economic recovery? What social impact will this crisis have on the organization and work in companies? How to prevent and manage the next wave. We'll have a lot of questions, and of course, as Lauren said, do not hesitate to ask your questions in the chat, and I'll ask the questions to our speakers along the way. To address all these themes, we'll have speakers on both sides of the Atlantic. That's the concept of our webinar here. So Paul Hermelin, who waved his hand, is chairman of the board, and was chairman of no, he's still, sorry, you're still the chairman of the board of directors and chairman of the strategy at CAPGEMINI. You've been leading this company for many years, 20 years, I think, and it's about the same time that John Chambers spent at the head of Cisco. He's now a founder and manager of our CEO at JC2 Venture. And to start with, we have the visit of our new Consul General de France in San Francisco. We're very happy to have him with us. He has just taken up his duties last August during the lockdown, and then California started suffering the worst fires probably of its history. Monsieur le Consul, your first impressions?
Thank you very much, Gilles. It has been a very strange period for me here. I did arrive absolutely a month ago, and I was expecting, even though we have a COVID, of course, situation, you know, I had in mind a thriving California with a very lively city and San Francisco. And I have to say, when I arrived, I sensed really the weight of of how COVID was felt here in California. It was a very different atmosphere, I have to say, from the atmosphere I left when I arrived to France. And actually, when I look back now, we see that mid-August was actually the peak of the epidemic here in California and in San Francisco. Now, what I see is that the numbers are actually much better. We are on a downwards trend in the Bay Area, at least, and in San Francisco, it's quite impressive, with 50% new infections less from one week to the other. So the trend is quite good, and that's reassuring. But it's true that when I arrived, the atmosphere was quite heavy, and you could see how the toll that the city and the region had paid to COVID. Now, of course, the second element, which was very unexpected, I have to say, we know that there are fires every year in California and in Northern California, but what is happening now is really something unseen before in terms of how early it started. This is supposed to be, the very beginning of the fire season usually. And here we had, thunderstorms. We had lightning from mid-August on, which is unseen, and very massive fires. So the extent of these fires is unseen either. So I arrived in a very bizarre context. And as we're speaking, it's more, just, you know, for our French viewers, it's more than the surface of the region Île-de-France, just for the Seoul, California, which has already burned. So it's a very...
Île-de-France is the whole Paris area, the very large suburbs. Probably the whole Silicon Valley, you could say, nearly.
In terms of dimension, yeah, it's very, very impressive. So 1.3 million hectares of wood, of forest have burned just in California. And then we've seen, you know, the same in Oregon, in Washington, to also unseen dimensions. So it's a very, very strange context. And these fires have, of course, generated these smoke clouds that we've seen all over the world. These fires have become a global issue now. We have seen the smoke reach the East Coast. We've seen the smoke reach Paris and the northern part of France. So it's a very strange situation, I have to say. Today, as we're speaking, the air is much better in San Francisco, but it's still very poor in Portland and in Seattle.
Frederic, you mentioned quickly the French community there in the Bay Area. Could you maybe recall us what's the strength, the power of this French community and the morale of the French people living in the Bay Area and among?
Yeah, well, we have many French entrepreneurs in the region, obviously. The consulate has 30,000 French people you know, that flagged themselves to a consulate, which is a quite extensive number compared to other consulates across the country. So obviously you have, you know, two worlds. The ones who are involved in tech are actually, you know, seeing the boom. You know, President Macron put it in these terms a couple of days ago. He said, tech likes COVID, because we saw how much tech companies actually boomed during the COVID period. We'll get back to that later, maybe. But then you have the other side of the spectrum with those who are, you know, involved in food and wine. And both for them, it's a very different situation. I've had the occasion to talk, you know, to people having restaurants, cafes, and for them, obviously, the COVID situation has created a huge loss of cash flow, of revenue. So it's a very difficult situation. They have had to let go many of their employees. So it's quite a grim picture so far. And then the recent challenge of fires actually also put pressure on, you know, those who are in the wine country, because obviously the smoke isn't exactly what you want on your grapes. So it's the COVID context and the fires bring a strange atmosphere. And I add to this, San Francisco is an empty city so far. I mean, the consulate is in a tower where I think besides the consulate employees, there is no one really around. So it's a strange atmosphere.
It's another topic, but it's still very actual. The French government here in Paris announced a new recovery plan for the digital industry of around $7 billion. Maybe you want to mention a few bullet points on that, and that would make a good transition for the discussion coming next with John and Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a French ambition, and also I really underscore it, a European ambition to bounce back. To be able to go beyond this crisis and you know, get back to the pre-crisis level in terms of economic in terms of economic situation. And the economic recovery plan that was announced by President Macron, 100 billion euros, is actually designed to allow us to bounce back. So out of these 100 billion, 40 of them will be coming from the European level, which is a big success. It's really an interesting endeavor, a very new step in European integration. And we are following basically three paths in this recovery plan. The first one is environment. We really need to make this shift towards just a sustainable and green economy. So a major part of this recovery plan will be towards a green shift. The second point is to get to the strengthening of the economic competitiveness of companies. And the third part is allow cohesion. That social cohesion is a major aspect of our policy, and we want to ensure social and territorial cohesion within the French nation. And so these are the three pillars. And within these three pillars, there's a digital dimension, as you said. So 7 billion euros will be allocated to the digital world, acknowledging that digital companies do create jobs, and that they contribute to the they will be extremely important for the recovery. So you have many aspects of that digital endeavor. First of all, we want to improve access, to the internet throughout France. We already have, it's very interesting to actually be here in California and see the level of service that is provided in terms of networks. And I see how the French internet service is already excellent across the country. So this will be improved further. We will also, improve the digitalization of the French state. And then, of course, support the French tech companies in France and abroad. Sorry for having been a little bit long, but these are the main aspects of the plan.
Thank you very much, Frederic. Thank you for staying with us during the whole session. We'll get back to you at the end of the session.
Thank you, Gilles.
I would like to turn to you, and maybe you could react on this. And when we see the situation in the U.S., who apart from these horrible fires, seems the lockdown is still in San Francisco. It's still very on the way, and it's still complicated for the population over there, and for business, of course. What is your vision of what's going on in France right now?
Whom you ask that question?
Joe, did you ask Paul? Did you ask John? Who was the question to, sir?
To Paul. I was
okay.
To Paul.
So the first point, just the people from California may read strange things in France and about France. And in France, we have a difficult situation because the young people thought that they have been confined to protect more aging people, and they have protested by partying all summer. And I really talked with some friends, and their kids say, we do not mind partying. We will get the virus. We will not meet our parents for a while, and then we will be immune, and that will be the best protection. So kind of strange situation where young people are kind of protesting against the virus confinement rules. Very strange. This being said, schools have opened up. There are tests, so with schools opening up, most companies have tried to bring their employees back in the professional premises. For CAPGEMINI, there are reluctance. We can feel it. Our main building in Paris, very close suburbs, we target an occupancy rate of 60%. And because as we can welcome 10% of people coming from our clients, it means 50% of CAPGEMINI employee, and that's where we are. We are nearly there, which means that people come 2 days a week, some of them 3 days a week, and that's probably the new working model we will have to implement, where people no longer come every day at the office. So working from home has changed the mind of the people and their relationship. We might talk about it further, and notably, how do you manage population that work from home in terms of keeping the culture, keeping contact, how do you compensate for all the informal communication that is so important to the company culture? But today in Paris and in France, I would say most companies have brought back people within their offices and within their factories, and most schools are open.
It's interesting to see the difference between France and the US, and maybe John, you can enlighten us on this, on what's going on in the US, because I have the impression, maybe, as Paul said, that in France, companies are trying to bring their employees back to work. And it's very different from what we have seen in Silicon Valley, or where, you know, whether Google or Facebook, these big companies, I don't know what's the situation at Cisco, but people are very keen to staying at home and still work remotely. Do you feel that difference of approach and the culture in a way, John?
Yes, I do in many ways, Gil. And I think it's important to take a step back. It is so easy to get involved with the crisis we face at the current time and understand it's not one crisis. It's 4 or 5 at the same time. We have one of the toughest economic challenges of our lifetime. And remember that the business leaders, both here and in France, with very few exceptions, and Paul and I are exceptions, haven't seen an economic downturn. It's been 12 years since we saw the Great Recession. And so many of the leaders of the smaller companies, or even the large companies, were not in their roles 12 years ago. You have a terrible pandemic, which is just stressing the American fabric and our family and personal lives in ways that it's hard to explain to people that aren't seeing how many issues there are. Every one of my startups usually has 3 to 10 employees that have already had the virus, and the implications on their lives and their kids when you're not going to school, when the parents are doing 2 jobs, are dramatic. A supply chain issue, which I think very few people have played all the way out in terms of what occurs in the marketplace. And then we have the environmental issues and the fires that are going on. So it's 4 changes at one time. But if you take a step back, and my parents were both doctors, they very quickly taught myself and my siblings, you deal with the world the way it is, not the way you wish it was. And Silicon Valley is remarkably resilient. If you watch in terms of the positioning from a business perspective, all of us would have done anything to avoid this. But one of the things that I've always done in my leadership, first at my time at Cisco, and I no longer talk about Cisco, that's a different leadership team there, and it's their responsibilities to run that as they go forward. I focused on what did I do when I was in a leadership role there, and then what do I do with my startups today. All of my startups have done the classic response to crisis management. Determine how much is self-inflicted, how much of it was the business issues, and that's usually a combination of the 2. You address them very quickly. You focus on your customers, your employees, you focus on your shareholders, you move with speed, try to make your changes once, and then it's the typical Silicon Valley 2-step or Texas 2-step, where you play defense, you prepared yourself to come out of the downturn, now you move to offense. And out of my 18 startups that I'm personally coaching, and probably another 100 that I talk to regularly, all of them are in that second phase. We wish we'd been able to avoid it, but it's a period you get disrupted or you disrupt yourself. And so I'm very much in the mode of what do you want to look like when you come out of this and address the issues aggressively. History has shown us that probably 40 to 50% of the Fortune 500, whether it's in Europe or here in the US, 10 years from now will not exist. And so companies who don't reinvent themselves, who don't become a digital company, and I don't see a distinction between a technology company and a manufacturing company anymore, or defense or retail. They're one and the same. Everybody will be like an Amazon. Everybody will be like an Uber in terms of combining the 2. So it's a period when the next generation of leaders will occur and job creation will occur. I think in this country, the large companies will not add headcount over the next decade in total. So all growth will come out of small companies getting bigger or startups. And it's important to get that across all of the 50 states here, just like across all the territories in France and all the region. It's a period where, from a business perspective, the businesses got hit really hard in February, March. The high-tech companies, and I'm talking about startups now, they're non-public, so I can share that data very openly, probably hit a low point in April. Almost all my startups did all their headcount changes, all their expense cutting before the end of April. And now all of them are beginning to look about playing offense. We're going to slowly start adding headcount back. It varies dramatically depending on which industry you're in, what technology you're in, such as artificial intelligence, customer services, whether you're in a retail segment of the business or whether you're in a service provider segment of the business. And candidly, the financial availability of resources is pretty good. I've already been on 2 calls this morning about the next round of fundraising in the country, and you're beginning to see the availability from the top venture capital companies move very well. So actually, I think from a technology perspective, you're seeing that transition already occur. And it's one of the things complementing France. I think your leader, and obviously I'm a huge believer in President Macron and the changes that he's making, are positioning France for the future as well, an inclusive future across the regions. And that's what I think the transition has to be. So unfortunately, the challenges are going to stay with us. I personally, if I were betting, would bet on a vaccine by the end of this year. That will take a while to roll out through the population. The population, the economic implications, 25% of our population who have houses or were renting did not make their payments last month. So this is something that will have economic implications way beyond 3 to 5 quarters in terms of the average American.
Paul, I had a question for you, Paul. If maybe you want to react on what's just.
I want to say
the question.
President Macron gathered a lot of French tech leaders yesterday morning in Paris, Monday morning in Paris, and there were reports. Most of the French tech initiatives are not only safe, but in relatively good health, but their growth expectation for the next 3 years have been reduced. So there is an impact, not the one that focus on e-commerce and these kind of things that will benefit from the disruption and the COVID new development models. But overall, at the macro level from French tech, I was struck where people were shooting for growth rate in the range of 40%, 40. There was still growth expectation, but more 25-ish. Huh? So notably people that want to sell to difficult segments, the transportation, the tourism. So there is an impact, not for all startups, but for some.
You know, Jill, so we can get an interactive session. Paul and I can usually finish each other's sentences. He has a better accent than I do, however. But what he outlined is true across the board. Most tech companies did a scenario A, B, and C planning for their businesses. Some of them brought their growth rates down by 15%. Some of them brought them down by 50%. It often depended upon the industry they were in. If you're in artificial intelligence and you're interfacing on customer services, the growth rates for those companies are 200% and 300%, and actually you're accelerating on it. If you're in an area like Zoom and video conferencing, those growth rates are increasing dramatically. But the average company, I think, will be on a scenario B type planning, off about 15 to 20% of what they would have expected their growth to be a year ago. But I actually am pretty optimistic. You'll see those start to bounce back at a faster pace for those that grow and survive. All large tech companies were a growth period of setbacks. And if you look at the American high-tech companies, including my prior company, Cisco, it was how they came through the setbacks determined their future in the industry as opposed to how they handle their successes. So I think you'll see a number of French high-tech companies and American high-tech companies of large companies come through this well, but you see a number of them get left behind. And then I think you'll see the next generation of major tech players, the next generation of the Microsofts, the Intels, the Ciscos, et cetera, within that. So it varies dramatically by company and by industry, but I think most tech companies are already moving back to offense, and then a realization, how long would this be with us?
Yeah, but when Macron spoke yesterday and the day before, and when the French tech, the representative of the French tech, as we call them here in France, spoke, they were also saying that was these different crises you mentioned, John, were also an opportunity not only for French companies but for European companies.
Yes.
To go ahead and stop fighting on fields that are already occupied by American giants like Cisco, like Google, and so on, and go ahead and try to reach the next tech revolution. Is that something feasible? How can we do it? I'm asking the question to Paul.
Okay.
And then we'll get back to you, John.
The first point is, can we now look at verticals? Because the impact of the crisis is dramatically different across different verticals. And if you look at the situation, frankly, today, when will we see Chinese tourists back in Paris? And will we ever see them? And will we see them in such large quantities that we saw them? And I spoke with the CEO of Galeries Lafayette, and he said overall it's okay, but in the main vessel on Boulevard Haussmann, but that one is empty. So the first point is, I think we cannot talk across all verticals. I just say we, CAPGEMINI, made a kind of a map of sectors saying. Of course, states are trying to compensate for the weakness of the private sector, so the public sector orders even new technology projects. The telco and high tech are booming. Aerospace industry are in shambles, and for several quarters, maybe 2-3 years. So if you think, I'm back in France, but Toulouse was booming. Toulouse was a city in complete euphoria. And now with the crisis of aerospace industries, there is stringent pessimism in Toulouse. I just say, John, I don't know if you ever been to Toulouse. Toulouse is really the city of Airbus and the French space agency. 70,000 people rely on aerospace industries in Toulouse. And so we should think, and I guess I read that Boeing is not in a better shape. So this is an international phenomenon, and we should read it across the two countries. So we see the traditional retailer in the US in deep trouble, and all online retailer booming. I read an article about Walmart going for drones delivery, okay? But I would just say, we cannot read the situation without serious distinction between verticals. And I get the feeling that the automotive sector will recover, and notably with a strong need for innovation. To come back to some level of activity, there will be an appetite for innovation. The aerospace industry are more anxious and more midterm. So that's across France and the US, certainly. So the question is now, in France, in the technology sector, what are our strengths? We have some strengths in digital manufacturing. Dassault Systèmes is a jewel. We have some good IT service company, of course. The telco player are in pretty decent shape, but we no longer, Alcatel is long gone now. So the tech game is not the best field for French company. And what we miss, by the way, when I'm asked in France, there is this obsession about the GAFA and their dominance of the world. What strikes me is most of tech innovation is about customer service. The innovation starts with customer. in France, we were good at launching big technology equipment. It could be the high-speed train, it could be a nuclear power plant. We were not good at consumer goods, at innovating in consumer goods, because in France, technology is completely owned by engineering school, Polytechnique, and we don't have the right respect for marketing and consumer innovation. And what I think is the breakthrough of high tech and California is everything starts with the customer and data that help us understand and service the client. John, any reaction?
Yes, we can finish Genesis and concepts. I'm much more optimistic on France than maybe even Paul. I think the transition that your country started on 5 years ago and focused on becoming an innovative startup nation, and you made the hard decisions, and your number of startups, venture capital backed, where France, being very candid, and Paul, you remember the meeting where I came over to ask the business leaders in France about 4.5, 5 years ago about, is this transition for real? Your counterparts and you said, it looks like it's going to be. And so when you have an attitude toward the French people of startups and creating new jobs and being the innovation engine for Europe, which I think you are, when I said that 5 years ago, people said, John, you're way too optimistic. France is not a good place to do business, not a good place to put employees. It has changed. And the point that I'm making is there is no entitlement by any country or any location, including Silicon Valley. You either disrupt or you get disrupted. You either change or you're going to get changed. The breakage on the large companies and small companies will be dramatic, but I think because of the changes your country's gone through and focusing on high-tech immigration and focusing on artificial intelligence with incentives and helping these startups, I think you will emerge from this as the example for the rest of Europe, and I see you moving faster than your counterparts do on that. The approach, you never go where the market was. It's like in soccer or football, as you call it in France. You don't teach your kids to go where the ball is, you teach where it's going to go. There's no reason to take on the existing giants. Those wars are already done. It's where do you focus on the future growth and how do you do that in an inclusive win-win type fashion? And could not have finished Paul's sentences better. The hottest area right now in technology is the artificial intelligence on customer services, where every company in the world, it doesn't matter if you're in retail, it doesn't matter if you're commercial airlines, it doesn't matter if you're in the fastest growth area in terms of the economy, everyone is focusing about how you interface fanatically to your customers. And my 3 startups in those categories are growing at over 200% per year growth rates, leveraging artificial intelligence, dramatic productivity improvement, but mainly changing the customer experience and using social media in that as well. The change that I'm leading you to is large companies are now in the US, and you see it in France, and you see it in India, and that's maybe a separate topic to hit a little bit later. They're partnering with startups to get a large part of the innovation to move faster. And this didn't exist before, because a large company partnering with startups, especially in France, why would you do that? The risk is high. That's not how we've traditionally done it. When you move with tremendous disruption, a lot of the innovation, because the young people from Polytechnique want to go to startups. Same thing with Stanford or MIT. They don't want to go to the large companies. And you see them generating the innovation at a faster pace. So we suddenly see, you talked about service providers, a Comcast, a Verizon, partnering with 8 or 10 startups in a way that moves their business dramatically, and they introduce innovation at a faster pace. So I'm the optimist that France will emerge in Europe as the top leader in your geography with innovation. I do anticipate there'll be bumps and setbacks along the way, but if I were betting on one country in Europe, I'd bet on France for that reason. And if I look in the US, we will navigate through this, but we will become a digital country with technology being the fabric for every industry, including government, defense, in a way that you haven't seen before. And we're seeing that dramatically in every aspect of our business. The defense agencies are moving with tremendous speed for new technology. You're seeing retail move with tremendous speed. You're seeing airlines that are in danger of staying in business saying, I'm going to skip a generation, I'm going to go straight to become a digital company, and I'm going to go where the market's going in the future. So I'm a realistic optimist, but I actually think fast forward 3 years from now, I think both of our countries will emerge from this stronger. The pain, however, is going to be lasting, and we've got to make sure we don't leave a large part of our country's citizens behind in this process.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Gilles, a remark just to mention.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we launched a joint initiative by HEC, which is a business school, very strong in marketing, and Polytechnique about artificial intelligence. And it was launched thanks to the financing of 3 large companies, 5 actually, but yes. L'Oréal, so a B2C giant, CAPGEMINI, and Total. So we were the 3 sponsors. We were joined by Rexel and Kering. So it showed that first, data is a new world that needs, for French people, the combination of traditional technologists, engineers, and marketing people, which is something that was very natural in the US. And it's new, so I would hopefully share the optimism of John about France's chances for the future. But the condition is to have a passion on clients. My last remark, and I think I was struck because we were yesterday night with the CEO of Polytechnique, and he told us half of our young engineers want no longer to create startups, they want to engage on the climate crusade. And that's something new, to say the anxiety of young people for the planet situation. And it may be that the same way we had a young engineer becoming a mathematician for financial trading, that was 10 years ago, the quant, the French polytechnicians that were cherished by Wall Street. A few years ago, a big wave of startup and entrepreneurs. Today, young graduate engineers want to engage in a crusade for the planet. Anything like that in the US, John?
The answer is absolutely yes. And what you're seeing is maybe for the first time, technology can play a huge positive implication on the environment and the planet.
Absolutely, absolutely.
From startups, you look at startups all of a sudden putting the energy at the edge of the grid and being able to generate energy with almost no emissions of CO2. You see a huge movement toward the electronic cars and dramatically reducing the emissions that do occur. And it was interesting, I'm very close to President Modi, Prime Minister Modi in India, when he and I had the chance, and he calls me his global ambassador in a fun way for the country. But when he outlines his digital plan, a large part of the digital plan is based upon the environment and how you use technology to change that in a positive way. What you're seeing is young, but you follow the money. You watch what the venture capitalists are doing. If the venture capitalists aren't backing the startups, it's usually mean the time is not there, it's not ready to move. Venture capital money is now moving back into the environment and is moving back into healthcare with a lot of speed. So it really means that some of the people with the biggest assets and a track record of being pretty accurate on trends are also seeing, Paul, what you outlined. And I actually think it's a combination. I think capitalism is going to be redefined between a financial return to shareholders and benefit to society. And companies who don't make that transition, whether they're large companies or startups, I think are going to face problems. And you're seeing that with some of the stress that's being put on the US, some of the large tech companies who perhaps lost their way on that issue. But no, I think you are seeing some of the best and brightest, and you're seeing the money follow that from the venture capitalists. So this is an area that is getting very interesting in many, many ways.
And John, you mentioned earlier your concern about leaving people behind. I mean, you're accelerating, we're all witnessing this acceleration of the pace of digitalization, right? How do you avoid that? I saw a comment from Cheryl Salmon, who says online communication working from home is almost better for work-life balance and for climate and so on. But I mean, it's also a concern of people not socializing anymore. I mean, at work, for instance. How do you deal with that?
You've asked about 3 or 4 questions. Let me try the first 2.
Because because you guys are talking together, and sometimes I have I'm experiencing some trouble to ask my questions.
Just hold up your hand, but you wanted an interactive
session.
So
I packed them in one. Yeah, sorry.
Two that are fun. First is that I think we have to do startups across all the major territories in France. And you have to do it across all 50 states in the US and across all 29 states in India. And I think the government leaders owe the obligation to their citizens to position the incentives to do that, to evolve the education to train the young people to be able to get meaningful jobs in it, and to encourage its capability. So this was my dream when I partnered with France about doing this, not just in Paris, but across all the regions in France, and the ability to work together uniquely on it. It's my dream with Prime Minister Modi, who I had the pleasure of introducing, and I'm chairman of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum just a week ago, about how he's focusing on 29 states and how do you drive it through to make it inclusive. So this is where you can't just let a market evolve. You've got to say, what do we want to look like 3 to 5 to 7 years out? Candidly, you've got to disrupt others. And the hardest group to change is those who have been successful. So in France, we can't rest on our successes. We have to say, now's the time for disruption, and have the courage to change and realize with change, something that often French companies, Paul, keep me honest here, didn't have as much appetite for risk. Where in the US, when you miss, that's a red badge of courage. And with startups, I often fund ones that have missed 2 or 3 times in terms of direction. So I think you need a national policy that is inclusive. I am doing that across the US. I am in 8 states currently, and I'm taking my home state of West Virginia, which was the coal mining center of the world and the chemical center of the world with Carbide, DuPont, FMC, and we got left behind. But now we're going to change our whole state to become a startup state. We're changing the curriculum in the schools, West Virginia University through. We have the governor, the speaker of the House, the president of the Senate. We're bringing in venture capital. We're going to win bids that we would never have won, an ability to dream again, and be a role model for how you do this, even in some of the most challenging geographies. But the key point is we are doing it with a plan that is thinking 3, 5, and 10 years out. And we're integrating education, inclusion of all the groups in the area, government and business, regardless of politics, venture capital investment, completely redoing the education forum, knocking down the silos in the university and focusing on outcomes, and focusing about our colleges training people to be startup companies as well. So you need a program to do it. I think it's very manageable. If we let the market, however, just operate on its own, the digital divide will get much worse, and so will the income divide. So this is where businesses and governments have to work together, and perhaps my view on a new form of capitalism as time has come.
Mm-hmm. Paul, you want to?
A few remarks. First point is, I'm very sensitive of the growing gap between, in France, some metropolitan areas where there are still job creation, and the rest of France where that is lagging behind, and that creates some desperation, and including the Yellow Vest protest movement of 2 years ago. Huh? So that's why, by the way, a little like John, I took the decision to launch a French tech initiative in a small town like Avignon, and I chair that French tech, and we try to develop it in a city of 100,000 people. Avignon is 90,000 people. So, but I would just say that question could be a little bit addressed with the work from home transition. Because if people have just to show up on their company premises 2 days a week, they may organize their life a little more remote from the main metropolitan areas and have the toll of having to get to the office or the company 2 days a week. So this can be an opportunity for a more balanced development across the country. But you were asking about work from home consequence on people. I have some concerns still, because first, we need to compensate for the absence of all the informal communication between people, where people get a lot of inspiration. And when I think new joiners, they are not part of the network. For them, they need to be welcome in a company. Can you welcome new joiners virtually on Zoom or Teams or whatever? More difficult. We have started in CAPGEMINI digital onboarding. It's possible, it's demanding, and you need to do a special effort to welcome the young graduate that joined the company. If you think of promotion, you will get promotion by hearing of opportunities within your company, by meeting at the cafeteria people. You don't necessarily get your career within the stream you're in. And most of your contacts come from being in the same building, being in the same cafeteria and meeting. So we need to compensate. And last, I don't know if this is a concern in the US, but if at the end, it's a lot of women that work from home, it's bringing back women to the German historical 3K, kitchen, Küche, and Kirche. I think women should be careful. They should resist the idea. Having the opportunity to enjoy a full professional career was part of a conquest of women a century ago, and working from home could bring us a little back down. It can look very prudent, but I'm sensitive to that. So work from home can open new things, notably on the territorial occupancy of France, and I welcome it. The other day, John told me that even for the West Coast, some people could relocate outside of very expensive areas, which could be a good thing. So there are new promises behind that new model, but there are also something that must be managed. Besides that, I totally concur with John on what he said. For the Indian question, as John knows, I chair the equivalent for France between French and India. We have a meeting in a very few days. But I will notice, the same Modi just opened new opportunities for new coal mines. And I understand India has probably some problem going totally green, but the coal is not the most climate-friendly energy source.
And how do you find the right balance between the two? The good balance between work and private life, and the good balance between working at the office and working at home, and not losing this very precious social contact.
Do you want me to take it?
A lot of companies are.
John, maybe you want to jump on it. Yeah, John.
Oh, please.
John,
Paul, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
John?
just today. Can I just say we have a consulting practice within CAPGEMINI, and as other McKinsey and other, a lot of clients are working on that. So there are experiments we try. We all know people will no longer come to the office 5 days a week. We all know that. So how to organize that? By the way, during the COVID confinement, the virtual session were pretty awkwardly driven, a little too long, and we had the feeling that at the end of the day, we did not accomplish everything we had in mind because of these long virtual sessions. So we need to professionalize the remote model. This is what we call the new normal. It is under definition. Leave us a few months to define what the new normal is. John?
Along that line, I do agree very much with Paul that the new normal will be a blended version of the two. It remains to be seen is that we're going to work in the office 2 or 3 days a week and at home 2 or 3 days. We're seeing a huge amount of resources, especially out of Silicon Valley, relocate. And those will probably never come back. So whether it's 10 or 40% of the workforce will be in remote locations, and that doesn't matter if it's in the Rocky Mountains or in Texas or North Carolina or back up in Chicago.
But they stay in the U.S. I mean, these resources, they don't go in. I mean, when you say relocate, you don't relocate them in South America or in Asia or.
Well, I would argue that France, the U.S. have unique spots where people do like to live very much. So we're not seeing the exodus out of a country. But to the indirect question you're asking is a real worry. If all of a sudden the U.S. doesn't get its act together on high-tech immigration, we will absolutely, whether it's startups or big companies, have more and more of our resources around the world. And once that gets put in place, it doesn't come back to the U.S. It not only resources stay there, the next generation of startups. So this is why you need a national policy in France and in the US on digitization and playing out the implications of it overall. And you've got to be nimble. If you watch the role of a CEO, and Paul, feel free to push back on me on this, I think the role was just 4 things: vision and strategy for the company, develop, recruit, retain, and change as appropriate the management team to implement that vision and strategy, culture, and communications. During the tough times, culture and communications are even more important than the vision and strategy. So how companies come through this, who survives, who does not, who grows, who shrinks, has a lot to do with how the leadership has the courage to really implant the cultural values that are so important to them. And Paul, I've looked at it, he's on corporate social responsibility programs all the time. And that's been part of his philosophy, that blended capitalism that we talked about before. And then communications as a leader have never been more important. You've got to be agile in that. So I actually think that it creates more opportunities than the challenges. But I do think the groups that get left behind, if we don't go with a planned approach, could be dramatic.
We're very close to the end of our session, so I had one of a kind of very last question for both of you. How do you see the future? Very basic question, but it's interesting. What will be the world in 7 weeks from now, and then the world maybe 5 years from now? Or do you want to?
If I start, can I just say, my fear is, I even heard that some vaccine will have short-term impact. So we will have to live with pandemic. That's a new discipline for the world. I think I totally concur with John in the very strong confidence in the power of technology to address the planet challenge and even the sanitary challenges. We have seen a new world, very digital. What we have not addressed, John and I, today is the influence of social network, and we can talk about it notably when related to the existing presidential campaign in the US. So the transformation of the democratic debate with the conspiracy theories and social network is, for me, a real big concern, probably bigger than the COVID itself, I would say. But I'm totally convinced that the combination of democracy and technology is the future, and we can bet on it.
Answering it the same way, in March, I was one of the first leaders in the US, and mainly because of my startups that I had involved in Asia. I felt that we were headed for an economic challenge as well as a pandemic challenge. And at that time, appearing on CNBC and Fox and other news channels, they said, "John, how long do you think this will last?" And I said, "A minimum of 3 to 5 quarters." They said, "This is the first time in your career I've heard you be a pessimist." And I said, "No, I was in 2001 when the downturn occurred and felt it was a 100-year flood and we needed to change, and realistic on 2008 and the great economic setback." I think we're pretty much on that timing. I worry now is the reverse. My worry is that we're stopped dreaming, that we focus so much on the short-term pain that we're going through, that we don't make the transition for what should we look like as we come out as a better society, more focused on the environment, more focused on inclusion, but also economic growth and job creation. And I think we have a chance now to reinvent our countries, our big businesses and our small businesses. And I think if we do this right, the future is bright 3 to 5 years out. The warning is, if we don't use this chance to reinvent, if we make our moves one move at a time and say, what do we do next? We will get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
A startup, a big company, or a country. So I'm going to push us to dream harder and then say, what can you do to make those dreams happen? What are the 3 to 5 things you must do for that dream to happen at a country or company level?
Well, thank you very much to both of you. You wanted to say something, Paul?
No. I completely agree with you.
All right. It was great to have you both for this hour. Really. Thank you very much for your time. It was great to have you and to hear your discussion. And I would like to, maybe because Frederic is still on mute, so if we can open his mic and if we can have one very last word from our new French consul and a very fresh observer from the situation there. Frederic?
Yes, thank you. No, it was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much to both of you. What I gather from this is there is a lot of room for regulation and for the state to be in support of the economic world, especially on the green shift that we need to do. There need to be state incentives to do this, as we see that this is, and again, coming back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion, California is burning, California is suffocating in smoke. The tech world and the business world needs to acknowledge this because consumers are actually acknowledging it. And if we don't follow this, consumers will make a shift that companies need to really acknowledge. And then, of course, on following up on the latest point on democracy and the role of social networks, I think it will be very important, to set some rules. This is on the way already. France has launched a law on fake news. It's a very difficult field. We need to be aware, obviously, of free speech and the major liberties that we cherish. But the regulation of information and social networks will be key also, and there needs to be a strong dialogue between companies, private companies, social networks, the GAFAs, and state in order to do so.
I'm going to bring one more issue if I can.
Sure.
As you do that regulation, and by the way, I've been supportive of privacy regulation done properly for quite a few years before many of my counterparts. You've got to be real careful of the economic implications and the effect it has on small businesses.
Mm.
As you look at the California privacy law as an example, the cost to business could be $55 billion. That's the California Attorney General's comments. All of a sudden, a startup, just to comply with the privacy rules, could have to take one of their 10 employees and focus on this alone. So you need a regulatory light or a view as you do these issues. Large companies can pay within reason whatever it takes. You'll lose jobs on that, but they can pay whatever it takes. Small companies can't survive. So as you do regulation, understand you can stifle the part of your community you need most. And you've got to understand that small companies cannot comply in the way that the large companies do on key government regulations. So I would encourage both of our countries to, every decision and every regulation we pass, do one for large companies and one that takes into consideration the small companies and job creation inclusion we must have.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you to you all. Paul, you want to add? You have the right to do
No, it's not.
Or to
I'm not campaigning one against
very
the
last
other.
word.
I'm not sure that would be constitutionally possible. The distinction between art and okay, let's try. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Fantastic discussion. Really, thank you. Thank you very much. And very last word to Laurence. I see you're mute, Laurence, but thank you again for this last session. You're back. Laurence, I'll leave you the very last word. Bye-bye to you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gilles, for the discussion. Really, thank you, Frederic, John, and Paul. This was very interesting and very inspiring. Thank you very much, because I think all our members in our community really benefit a lot from this discussion. So very useful, very honored again, lot of things. But really, thank you very much. We hope to see you for the 7th edition of France versus California or Silicon Valley. We'll announce the topic very soon. Thank you again, everybody, and have a nice day, evening if you're in France. The sun is coming out in California, so that's a good thing.
Bye. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Frederic.